Hi everybody, it's me again in the same clothes. It's the same day. But welcome to Module 3. Today we're going to be talking about some realities of sexual assault. This is going to be set up a little bit differently than the last module you watched with me. I'm not going to be really going over an entire lecture with information, but today is going to be question, answer, a little bit of a fun activity. So as I'm asking these questions on your end, think about if try and guess the answer, try and think if you know the answer. I'm going to give you said answer at the end of it. And then you're gonna go ahead and learn some myths and some facts. So we're gonna get right into it for module 3. Alrighty. So here's module 3, realities of sexual assault. So these are your learning objectives. Try and answer at least two of these questions about prevalence of this of sexual assault in the U.S. If not, it's okay. It's kind of just a fun activity, but it also is informing you about the stats and the facts and the myths that are present among us with this. And then also try to at least identify like two myths and two facts about rape and sexual assault. So, to start with this, we're going to question each other how much you know about the incidence and prevalence of sexual assault. I'm sure many of us probably think it's high. Maybe some of us think it's low. I know going through this, it was definitely shocking to me to see the facts and the myths going on with that. So, just a question to ask yourself, just some food for thought. But to start, I have 7 questions that we're going to go over right now for this activity. So the question is, over their lifetime, what percentage of women experience some form of contact sexual violence? Um, so go ahead, take a second. You can pause the video if you want to kind of see if you can guess it. But the answer for this question is D, 44%. Next question. Over their lifetime, what percentage of men experience some form of contact sexual assault? And the answer is C, 25%. Over their lifetime, what percentage of transgender people experience sexual assault? And the answer is D, 47%. Next question is in 2015, what percentage of females victims of sexual violence reported receiving victim services? And that is A, which is 21%. Next question is in 2018, what percentage of all sexual assaults were not reported to law enforcement? So these people did not report them. So that is answer D, 75%. So a lot of times people do not report because they're scared or pressured or anything really, but a large, vast amount of people do not report. How many military service members reported experiencing a sexual assault in fiscal year 2020? And the answer for that is B, 7,816. So, military service, you will hear a lecture about that later on, given that we are part of a military organization. So, that is important to know. And then, last question, what is the estimated lifetime cost of sexual assault victimization per victim? And the answer for that is D, $122,461. So a little expensive moving forward. Now with this, we have about 20 myths and facts. So I'm gonna go ahead and read the myth and talk about the facts. So first to start, the myth is that people can increase their risk of sexual assault when they dress provocatively or act in a promiscuous manner. Oftentimes we hear, well, what were they wearing? Or well, what were they doing when it happened? Where fact is that sexual assault is a crime of violence and control. So it can derive from someone that wants to exercise power onto somebody. It's not a provocative manner or a promiscuous behavior as an invitation for unwanted sexual activity or sexual force. Uh, Forcing somebody into non-consensual sexual acts or activities is sexual assault, regardless of how they're dressed, regardless of how they're acting. It's sexual assault if it's forced, non-consensual. The next myth. If a person goes to someone else's room, house, or a bar, they assume the risk of sexual assault. If something happens later, they can't claim they were sexually assaulted because they should have known not to go to those places. This assumption of risk does not place responsibility on the offender's actions, and it is on the actions of the victim. They place this responsibility on the victim, even though if someone went to someone's house or room, um, and decided to consent and engage in sexual activity, it doesn't serve as a blanket consent for all sexual activity. Like when someone says no or stop, that means no and stop. It doesn't just void it because they went there and they should have expected it. So, this myth, if you go somewhere, you should just assume that if something happens that it you should have not went there. Wrong. Wrong. Moving forward, a myth, it's not sexual assault if it happens after drinking or taking drugs. The fact with this is being under the influence of drugs or alcohol is not an invitation for unconsented sex or any type of sexual activity. You don't need to be on drugs. You don't need to be under the influence of alcohol or whatever you're doing to have that be an invitation. Like in the past slide, no means no, stop means stop. Do not take advantage of someone when they are not mentally stable. Because, we're college students, we know people do drugs, people drink. You're not mentally stable, so that does not mean take advantage of someone. And just because someone is under the influence does not mean it's okay because they're under the influence. Another myth, most sexual assaults are committed by strangers. A sexual assault can be committed by anybody, any type of relationship. It doesn't matter whether it's a current relationship, a past relationship, if it's and that's between the victim and the offender. Any unwanted sexual activity is unwanted and is sexual assault and is a crime. So it doesn't have to be a stranger. It can be anybody that you know. It can be a friend. It can be anybody, family. And unfortunately, it does happen. It's a crime and it is sexual assault when it is unwanted. The next myth is that sexual assault can be avoided if people avoid dark alleys or dangerous places where strangers might be hiding or lurking. The fact is that sexual assault can happen anywhere, anytime, any place, happen to anyone. It doesn't matter if you're in a dark alley or it's dangerous. Yes, that can happen, but just because it happens there doesn't mean it can't happen anywhere else, as we know. Moving on. A person who has really been sexually assaulted will be hysterical. And the truth is with this is that victims of this violence can exhibit really a spectrum of responses that can be anything. People respond to trauma differently, people grieve differently. So they can be calm, they can be hysterical, they can withdraw from everybody, they can be angry, they can have apathy, they can deny everything, they can be in a sense of shock. They really could act any sort of way. Every individual is different, every situation is different per individual. So if someone is not acting hysterical, don't diminish their feelings. If they're not crying or just withdrawing and they seem kind of calm, do not diminish them at all. People can respond to trauma in various different ways. The next myth, only young, attractive people are sexually assaulted, and this is false because sexual assault is a crime nonetheless, and it is kind of a focus on power and control. So most of the time, the offenders are choosing someone that is seen or that they seem to be vulnerable to attack. So it's not about being young and being attractive, though maybe some people may contribute being young and attractive to being vulnerable. It's not that. Um, if the offender perceives you as vulnerable, they would attack, regardless of what you look like, how old you are, whatever. It can come from all walks of life. You could be very old, you could be very young. Unfortunately, sexual assault is a crime of power and control. Next, it's only sexual assault if the victim puts up a fight and resists. Wrong. Again, the fact is that there are many reasons why a victim would not try to fight or would not want to resist. Um, but that just because they let it they let it happen or they're not resisting does not make it an okay and does not make it consent. Oftentimes people think, well, they didn't really fight, doesn't mean it was consensual at all. So, like it says, people have their reasons for not putting up a fight, and if they do, then, but thinking that just because someone doesn't put up a fight makes it okay is wrong. Next, someone can only be sexually assaulted if a weapon is involved. Sexual assault happens without a weapon. Even in most cases, there's not a weapon involved. Most of the time, kind of coming back from the fact of vulnerability and the idea of power and control. The offender typically uses their own physical strength and violence or threats and intimidation. So those tactics all combine to overpower their victim. And if they know that, or if they feel like their victim is powerless or super vulnerable, all these intimidation and just these tactics can overpower them easily without the use of a weapon at all. Sexual assault is mostly an interracial crime. Um, the vast majority of violent crimes that include um, sexual assault are interracial. So, sexual assault, sorry, I meant to say interracial. I'm gonna enunciate that interracial, the myth, where the fact is intraracial. The next myth, if there was no penetration by a penis, there was no sexual assault. The fact is, for the purpose of this training, we are going to refer sexual assault as any sexual contact or behavior that happens without explicit consent. So, in this training, if any form of sexual contact or activity happens and it wasn't consensual, then it is assault, regardless if there was no penetration by the other male's genitalia. Uh, it's sexual assault, period, if it's unconsensual. Most people lie about being sexually assaulted. It's not really a big problem. That's the myth. The fact is that about 2 to 10% of all sexual assault reports are false. So that means that as many as 98% of people who say that they were sexually assaulted were actually assaulted. So, the myth of being that it's not that really big of a problem, it is. If you are sexually assaulted or if someone you know is sexually assaulted, it is a problem. Yes, it does say that 2 to 10% of the reports are false, but look at the stats. 98% of people who say that they are actually sexually assaulted, it actually happened. The next myth, GHB is the most commonly used drug to facilitate a sexual assault. With the fact of this is that most sexual assaults happen when someone is using alcohol or a weapon to make another person vulnerable and take advantage of them in that incapacitated state. So going back to that other fact about being drunk or high under the influence of whatever gives it an okay, wrong. Again, drugs are often used to make another person vulnerable. You hear things about people being roofied at, clubs or a bar. Sometimes people will put things in car door handles, like a certain drug that if you touch your face and it'll knock you out and then they'll find you and take advantage of you, stuff like that. So it can, sexual assault can be used with alcohol or as a weapon. in most cases. The next myth, most sexual assaults occur in isolated places. Like like a broken record, sexual assault can happen anywhere, anytime, with anyone. That's just the fact. It can. The next one, a sexual assault behavior will be battered, or survivor. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said behavior. Survivor will be battered, bruised, and hysterical. The fact with this is that a lot of sexual assault survivors are not visibly injured. And again, people react differently. They don't have to be hysterical, they can be calm. And that's the reality of any situation in general. People can react differently. And then being visibly injured does not mean that you aren't injured at all, because you can be internally injured as a female or anybody. You can be internally injured. And you're not going to be always battered, bruised, and hysterical. The next myth, men can't be sexually assaulted. Fact is, 1 in 6 and 1 in 10 males are sexually assaulted. So, any man, it can happen to any man, regardless of their size, their strength, how they identify sexually, or their appearance. Men can be sexually assaulted, and it is equally as important as if a woman or somebody of um, transgender is assaulted as well. Next is that only gay men are sexually assaulted. Heterosexual men, gay, and bisexual are equally likely to be sexually assaulted. So, being assaulted has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. Again, it can happen to anyone of any orientation, of any type. It can happen to you. The next myth with that is that only gay men sexually assault other men. Actually, most men who sexually assault other men identify as heterosexual. So, sexual assault is often a violent, angry control thing over another person, and it's not about lust. It's not about sexual attraction. It's a violent thing. So, to assume only gay men assault other men is false, because it can be straight on straight. It can be anything with anybody. Another myth, erection or ejaculation during a sexual assault means the victim really wanted it or consented to it. The fact is that erection and ejaculation are physiological responses that come from physical contact, or even extreme stress can cause these things. So just because these things happen does not imply that the victim is enjoying themselves or they wanted that thing to happen. It is assault if it's non-consensual at all. And remember, those things are physiological. With that, sometimes you cannot control those things. So just because you have those, or somebody else has those, it doesn't mean yes. All sexual assault victims will report the crime immediately to the police. Like stated before, a lot of people don't report these things. Because either for whatever reasons they may not want to discuss it, or they may feel it's unnecessary, or they're too traumatized to go through the process. They don't want to speak up. Oftentimes you do see people speaking up later, but it's not an immediate thing. A lot of people do stay quiet about it. All right. So I know that was a lot of myths, a lot of facts, a lot of things thrown at you. Um, Take a second to familiarize with those. Take a second to breathe, because those were some deep facts and realities of what happens here in the United States and how prevalent it is. But like stated when we started the lecture, try to, test yourself with those things. This was a good activity to see how much you knew, how much you could infer, what you thought about the United States. If you want, you can go through these and test yourself. Just a way to stretch your brain about what goes on around you. But other than that, we will see each other in another lecture.